Today I'm going to be showing you a beautiful snowflake design. We're going to start by outlining and flooding our cookie with a light blue royal icing. This is going to be a multi-step snowflake. Some other snowflakes that we've done are single step, where we're leaving the base of the cookie plain and just adding our detail on top of it. But with this one, we're using our sugar cookie and we're going to flood the base with royal icing, let that crust over, and then pipe some details on top. If you're not familiar with the term crusted over icing, all that means is that the top layer of that royal icing has started to dry, forming a crust, but the underneath is still wet. So working over a just crusted over base helps with a few things. It first of all helps the icing that you're adding on top, especially if it's outline consistency icing and it's a bit thicker. It does help it adhere to the base a little bit better. The moisture in the below layer of the icing will help prevent any cratering or holes or sinking that happens in the icing. Now, you may be asking, how long does it take to have your flood base crust over? Well, the answer depends. It depends on how humid it is in your environment, how hot it is. If it is winter and the humidity is lower, it may take much shorter amount of time. If it's the middle of summer and it's hot and humid out, it may take much longer. If you are drying your cookies in front of a table fan, which is what I highly recommend, it should take between 20 and 30 minutes to just barely crust over. But honestly, you can wait up until an hour or two and your under base will still be wet. Royal icing takes about 12 to 24 hours to completely dry, again, depending on the environment. Now that our base has crusted over, we're going to go in with some white detail or outline consistency icing. As a reminder, outline consistency icing should be very similar in consistency to toothpaste. Believe me, after you've been decorating cookies long enough, you will never look at your toothpaste the same way. When I'm piping lines of outline consistency royal icing, it's important that I start piping the line when my piping tip is not touching the cookie. I've talked about this in other videos, and it's a really important skill to learn. So if you're a beginner that hasn't had a lot of experience piping lines with outline consistency, I always recommend that you do a couple practice lines first on a paper towel or a piece of parchment paper. That way you can really get the feel of what it should feel like, putting that pressure on the bag and letting the line of icing fall down onto the cookie. Again, we should not be starting our lines with our piping tip touching the cookie. It should be, we're pushing out the line and letting the line, lay down on top of the cookie. And then same thing when we're ending the line, we should be releasing that pressure from the bag and then laying down the end of the icing. Using these tips and techniques helps you to not only have a straight, even line, but also helps prevent that bubbling that can sometimes happen on the beginning or ending of a line that is caused by pressure of your piping tip on the actual cookie. If you're doing everything I'm saying, but you feel like your lines are not looking like mine, you might want to consider a few things. Your icing might be too thin. If you feel like your lines are uneven, maybe they're still bubbling at the end or looking thicker in certain parts than others, you may want to change the consistency of your icing, adding a little bit of powdered sugar at a time until you feel like you have a thick icing that still appears a little bit wet, again, similar to toothpaste, but isn't too thick where it crusts really quickly, almost like you're creating a sprinkle. The other thing that you may want to consider is that your icing may be too thick. So if it's breaking easily, if it seems to have a lot of hidden air pockets where that line is breaking and you're having to put a lot of pressure on your bag, your icing may be too thick and difficult to work with. The other thing that you may want to check is that perhaps your the hole that you cut in your tipless piping bag is too small. If we cut a really, really tiny hole, sometimes the icing doesn't have enough room to come out and it can end up curling when it is being pushed out, which makes it really difficult to pipe lines because then you don't have a straight line coming out of the actual piping bag itself. But please keep in mind that even if you don't have perfect lines, this cookie will be beautiful and absolutely delicious. It's the perfect cookie to practice on. Practice your lines, keep going, make extras, keep practicing, and I will be happy to help with any questions you may have. Cookie decorating is a journey, and it's a journey that has brought so much joy to my life, and I know it will to yours as well.